Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Alright, let's cut to the chase. Richard Dreyfuss is kicking up a fuss about the Oscars diversity policy. Now, this is a concept that's gotten more than a little press in the white media, but there's absolutely no evidence that these guidelines, weak and meaningless as they are being enforced or that they mean anything. And yet the phony racial outrage machine is already ginning up like a busted motor. Richard Dreyfuss says the guidelines make him want to vomit. Then he goes into a deranged, addle-brained rant about Laurence Olivier doing blackface back in the day and how Richard Dreyfuss thinks that he should be able to go for the role of a black man if he wants to. Well, if Richard Dreyfuss was a black man, he certainly wouldn't have a career worth anything in Hollywood. If he was black, almost no one would have seen any movie he'd been in. But why is Dreyfuss so angry about this? When you see some white celebrity or politician coming out of left field complaining that they're so put out about something, then you need to look at their record. See if the reason they're kicking up a fuss is because they're trying to conceal something. For example, on my Twitter page, I reminded people that back in 1998, Richard Dreyfuss made a so-called movie called Krippendorf's Tribe. Yes, this was an actual major movie that got made. This is not some mock-up or a parody you're seeing. This was a real movie, and Richard Dreyfuss starred in it. I actually tried to watch it 15 or so years ago, but even I wasn't prepared for how egregiously racist this reeking pile of celluloid was. At the end of this pile of dog crap, they tried to cover their behinds and do a pathetic racial make-good. Suddenly, the remote tribe in the middle of nowhere that Richard Dreyfuss was spoofing had white people in it. So obviously Dreyfuss had been feeling a little self-conscious about some of the roles that he's taken over the years. And yet, nobody throws that in his face. Nobody throws Krippendorf's Tribe in his face. That's allowed to fall down the memory hole, even now. But the real question is, why does Richard Dreyfuss want to be in blackface so much? That clown wouldn't want to walk in a black man's shoes for 5 seconds. And if he claims he does, then there's an easy way for him to do that. All he has to do is go in public and say that he has a black grandfather. So that basically makes him black under U.S. law. That's all he has to do. And he can go ahead and walk in a black man's shoes the rest of his life. I mean, if being able to play the role of a black man means so much to him, seems to me like that's a small sacrifice to make. Except he already knows that the second that he tells anybody that he's black, then all of those roles that those white media companies have been giving him would dry right the hell up. Now, for the record, Richard Dreyfuss is Jewish. Does anyone truly believe that he would absolutely have no problem if somebody came along and said that a black girl should play as Anne Frank in a movie? Or perhaps that a black man should be running around playing a Holocaust survivor? If somebody decided to make a movie about, say, Steven Spielberg's life, I wonder what Dreyfuss would say if Denzel Washington got the role. Using his logic, I'm sure he would have absolutely no objections to any of those changes, right? Because after all, it's about actors having an opportunity to portray different people and be different things, right? If Richard Dreyfuss really wants to play a black person so much, well, he could start by going to talk to black people, actually embrace the positions and ideas that black people do, even in Hollywood. And then he can internalize that and actually see things the way black folks do. See, white actors like Richard Dreyfuss talk all the time about playing different characters and how to them it's not about liking a character or not, it's about understanding the character so you can manifest the character. Well, he should try understanding the black experience firsthand so that he can better portray it whenever he gets around to playing a black person on screen. I mean, we all remember how moving Robert Downey Jr. was in Tropic Thunder, don't we? Or C. Thomas Hall in Soul Man. Hey, how about that tear-jerker performance from Dan Aykroyd back in the day in Trading Places? Oh, that was just fine art, wasn't it? Those were all Oscar-winning performances, weren't they? Now, if we lived under a system of justice, then Richard Dreyfuss would never have opened his ignorant mouth to spout this garbage. But under white supremacy, we live in a bubble, and reality is never allowed to intrude, so some people can say whatever gibberish they want and never get called out for it. At least not by the white media. They don't have to pay a price for their stupidity. It's not so much that he's taken seriously, because he's not, but that his asinine assertions are not treated with the howling contempt and ridicule that they would be if a black person started talking like that. If anything, Richard Dreyfuss should stop whining and thank his lucky stars that he gets treated the way that he does, which would not happen if he was black. For example, back in 2017, after the Weinstein scandal broke, Richard Dreyfuss was accused of sexual harassment and exposing his genitals to a woman back in the 1980s. Now, they turned Bill Cosby's life upside down over old claims that were demonstrably false. The white media calling people victims when it was obvious these women were claiming that Bill Cosby was at places he couldn't possibly have been at. They were obviously making these stories up. So what about Richard Dreyfuss? Did these claims of sexual harassment and lewd behavior derail his career? Did it even slow it down? No, of course not. Nothing happened to him at all. He didn't even apologize. And the white media allowed it to fall down the memory hole because that's what they do for everyone who's not black, who's accused of wrongdoing. Dreyfuss didn't get the treatment that Nate Parker got for something Nate Parker didn't even do. But like a lot of these white supremacist males, Tricky Dick Dreyfuss is feeling sorry for himself. Well, given his filmography, he certainly has a lot to feel sorry about. And it would be one thing if Richard Dreyfuss was the only idiot out here trying to claim some sort of phony racial oppression, but unfortunately that talking point has been metastasizing for over 150 years. And today it's grown to asinine proportions. For example, NPR reported that a majority of white people say that they've been discriminated against because of their race. By who, you ask? The white men who own the majority of America's businesses, the white men who are the majority of political office holders, the white men who are the owners and administrators of the media, perhaps? Who is discriminating against this 55% or so of white people who say that their race is being held against them? When you're 65% of the population, but you control over 90% of the wealth, it looks more than a little weird to say that that's the group being discriminated against. And even the people who say it don't actually believe it, because when they were asked to say where it was that they had been personally discriminated against, only 19% could say applying for a job. Only 13% could say job promotions. And only 11% could say college admissions. Now, if these claims are true and all of these white people are being discriminated against for jobs and promotions and college admissions and such simply because they're white, then why is the white unemployment rate only a fraction of the black unemployment rate? Why is it that white people are still the majority of America's collegiate body and not black people? And why is it that white people are still the majority of middle managers and senior executives in America? You have 55% of white people saying their race makes them targets of discrimination, but when you ask them where and when in their lives they've been discriminated against, they suddenly start saying, well, not so much. And I mention this because Richard Dreyfuss isn't the only one who's claiming that being white is somehow a disadvantage for him. Is this a legitimate complaint, or is it racial anxiety of some sort? Seriously, where's this stuff coming from? Because if it's true, then why is it that white high school dropouts are as likely to land jobs as black college students? In America, if you're black and you went to college, your chances of getting a job are no better than a white applicant who never went to college at all. In fact, a white applicant who never graduated from high school. So the question is, how many jobs are being occupied by white applicants that a black applicant was more qualified for? Who are the majority of employers in the United States? I guess there's no connection there. Back in 2005, Princeton University conducted a study of 1,500 employers in New York City. Only a handful of white media publications covered this story. Princeton found that black applicants with no criminal record got about the same response to their job applications as white applicants who had criminal records. So in New York City, a white applicant who's coming out of Rikers Island has about the same chance of getting a job as a law-abiding black citizen. But white people are the ones being told that they're being discriminated against. And let's not get started on the criminal justice system. There's reams and reams and reams of evidence from every city in the U.S. that white people use drugs at a far higher rate than black people, but black people are the ones who get arrested for it. And it's not because the police don't know, it's because the police refuse to make arrests based on race. And this is why the so-called crime stat game is a fraud. We actually don't know what the white crime rate is because the police consistently refuse to arrest, prosecutors refuse to charge, And if they do, they're much more likely to offer a sweetheart plea deal that allows them to get off scot-free and have their records clear. And black people do not commit crimes at the rate of the number that the FBI's crime stats claim. The best proof of our innocence is that we are the vast majority of prisoners who are exonerated. The stats aren't even close. Now, as far as this whole white people are being discriminated against thing, you can go all the way back to chattel slavery with that one. When people started first talking about abolishing slavery, that's when you had the white supremacists in the South claiming that, oh my God, black people are going to have more rights than you. Well, they already have more rights than us now. They were saying that during chattel slavery. The white supremacists have always responded to any assertion of black people's rights or black people being able to enjoy whatever opportunities exist as discriminating against white people because white supremacy has conditioned a significant number of the population to see everything as a zero-sum game. All it takes is a handful of black athletes, and black people are being told that there's no more racism in America. Apparently, LeBron James got rid of it. Or was it Michael Jordan? Or was it Jim Brown? Or was it Hank Aaron? Or was it Jackie Robinson? I keep forgetting, because it's been abolished about a dozen times now by a dozen black athletes, and yet for some strange reason it still seems to be around. Now, the NBA isn't owned or run by black men. White men own the teams and run the league. They own the sports arenas and the advertisers who these leagues do business with. Black men are not the ones who decide who gets hired by these teams or how much they even get paid. White men control all of that. One of the biggest problems with white privilege is that people in the white media can say whatever wrong or ridiculous thing they want, and there's absolutely no repercussions for it. They don't get shamed, and they don't even get told that they're wrong. And then you have clowns like Fox News and Republican politicians who repeat these lies, and the lies become part of the political discourse. This is why these so-called think tanks like the Manhattan Institute hire professional propagandists like Heather McDonald and Charles Murray. This is their job, to make fiction out of fact and sprinkle some academic-sounding jargon on top of it in the hopes that people will think that it's objective and scholarly, when in reality it's mouth-frothing racist rhetoric. Their job is statisticulation. I told you about that term years ago. It means to take a legitimate statistic and then to add qualifiers and conditions to it and to make an improper comparison until you invent a stat out of whole cloth that says what you need it to say. Heather McDonald's fiction book, The War on Cops, is a good example of that statisticulation. She takes the already horribly skewed FBI crime stats and then stomps on them and mangles them beyond all recognition. As the old saying goes, if you torture the numbers long enough, they will confess. So no, contrary to Richard Dreyfuss and the white media's fantasies, white people in America are not being discriminated against because no one has the power to discriminate against them. And that's a good thing, isn't it? But for the sake of argument, and there really isn't an argument, let's say that Richard Dreyfuss and the white media are right. The white people in America are indeed being discriminated against because they're white. They're being discriminated against for jobs, for promotions, for admissions to colleges. Then shouldn't they be talking to the white people who run those institutions? I mean, if we're looking for answers seriously, isn't that where the Richard Dreyfusses and others should be going to? But the entire point of the Fox News white discrimination hoax is that it's meant to promote racial aggression in response to non-existent discrimination. It's not about stopping discrimination because it's not happening. What it's about is to mobilize people to hold the line, if you will, against black people trying to get jobs or into schools or simply trying to live their lives. A lie repeated over and over again doesn't make it true, though it does make it remembered, which for these racist rhetoricians is the point. Fox News and the white right media know full well that's how it works, but the facts don't care about phony racial outrage, and neither do I. So what is causing this white anxiety by Richard Dreyfuss and others? The problem is that they're ultra-hypersensitive. White supremacy requires that the Richard Dreyfusses be that way. When you set up a colossal fraud like the American racial order and you make sure that you guarantee outcomes in every arena of the society based solely on race, then you've created something that defies reality. And reality always gets the last word. Simply put, what goes up must come down. So the white supremacists understand they've created an enormous vacuum through their racial corruption, a colossal house of cards that must fall. The problem is that for racists like Richard Dreyfuss, their identity is inherently linked to black people. They only feel things are right in their lives so long as they're bad in black people's lives. Otherwise, they feel like they're going to lose their place in the society. It's a lie that we see so many anti-black racists cling to when black people get something that it's because a white person had it taken away from them. It's not true, and the people saying know that it's more or less a lie, but the white supremacists need to hold on to that lie because otherwise it means they have to contemplate that they're not in control. And if they're not in control, how can they guarantee that they get their goodies, giveaways, and other grab bags that white supremacy hands out? These things are a given, or as Abraham Lincoln put it, assigned to those classified as white based on race. Guaranteed prosperity and opportunity is only possible if there's someone actively working to give it to a select group or person, and working to make sure that it stays that way. White supremacy is about choosing winners and losers, and it's been made clear for hundreds of years that black people are the designated losers in the society. So anything that shows black people actually able to affect the environment that we live in, that's going to be seen by the Richard Dreyfuses as a threat. It means that there's a chance that things won't be guaranteed for him because he's dependent on white power to hand him every crumb of his daily bread. And he's not alone. The outrage may be phony, but the insecurity that motivates it is quite real. White power's beneficiaries require that the system reassure them every day that nothing has changed and nothing will change. White power is no good if it can only hand them goodies today but not tomorrow. So these white supremacists demand that white power spoon feed them a living forever. If Hollywood were to ever fire or lay off those non-white actors or writers or whomever that Richard Dreyfuss is so worried about, that wouldn't create any new work for him. Two-bit bigots like Richard Dreyfuss will never understand just because Hollywood gets rid of a Chandra Rhimes or doesn't have any more black stormtroopers. That doesn't mean that they'll suddenly decide to start hiring overrated chumps like Dreyfuss or any of these racists who complain about diversity, but the racists don't care about that. For them, it's not about them gaining anything. It's about them not feeling so bad about losing. Richard Dreyfuss doesn't care if he doesn't get an Oscar or if he never works again. What he cares about is not feeling as if he's falling behind black people. Nothing black people have done has made these white supremacists any poorer, nor are they in danger of becoming poor, but the fact that black people are merely able to make demands makes them feel poor. Because as far as they're concerned, that's not supposed to happen. That's supposed to be impossible in America. That's against the status quo, a status quo that benefits people like Richard Dreyfuss. Black people are supposed to be out of sight, out of mind. And if they're not, then that's a threat. Richard Dreyfuss isn't being discriminated against at all, and he's not being disadvantaged at all. If his only gripe is that he can't play Othello, then he doesn't have anything to gripe about. And yet, that's exactly what he's doing, because no one in the white media will call him a snowflake for bawling like a baby that he can't run around in blackface. And this guy is lifelong friends with Steven Spielberg, I should add. Richard Dreyfuss hasn't been relevant since forever, and if he thinks he's going to get an Oscar at his age, and given the roles that he's had the last 15 years or so, then he doesn't need an acting coach, he needs a shrink. Imagine being so pampered, so mollycoddled, so insulated from any and all competition or from anything that displeases you at all, that the only thing you can find to whine about is that you get criticized if you run around in blackface. Oh, boo-hoo. If that's not oppression, I don't know what is. Imagine if you're so low down and degenerate in your mentality that you actually think that is what oppression is. How do you reason with people who are so divorced from reality? Answer, you don't. The end. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. AH, Transatlantic Slave Descendant Network, Tanya Montagut, Olivia Jones, and Barracuda Tech. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.